friends, countrymen, Ontarians, how are you? Welcome to episode 3 of the Wild Ontario podcast. Today we're talking with Jeff Dickie, who is a invasive species technician with one of the conservation authorities here in Southern Ontario. He was trained as a forest technician, trained as an arborist. Fascinating conversation about oak wilt. If you love oak trees in Ontario, you have to watch this. There's over 400 different species, many wildlife species that rely on oak trees, and all of them are under threat from a fatal fungus called oak wilt. This is a very important podcast. Please listen to it and share it to everyone who cares about oak trees in this province, who cares about wildlife. So many wild critters rely on those, especially the acorns that the oak trees deposit in our great forests here in Ontario. If you want to support the Wild Ontario podcast, please do so, wildontario.com, patreon.com/wildontario. And for just a small donation a month, you can help the production of all this content that we're pumping out. And check us out on Instagram and TikTok. I give you episode 3 of the Wild Ontario podcast.
Well, thank you so much, good sir. Mr. Jeff Dickie. We're here to talk about trees in Ontario, and you were highly recommended to me by somebody on Instagram. So I'm looking forward to chatting it up, good sir. First of all, where are you located in Ontario?
I'm in Hamilton, but I've kind of been all over the place the past couple of years, pretty much. So mostly GTA, but yeah, pretty much like Halton, Hamilton area. So yeah.
Gotcha. And what is your official title? Like, do you work with a certain organization? Are you like an independent forest tech and arborist, or how does it work?
I used to work in private industry for pretty close to 15 years or so, and now I work mostly with conservation authorities. So I was a forest tech by schooling, arborist by training, and now I'm an invasive species tech with conservation authorities. So
invasive species specifically. Oh my God.
Yeah, so this year's been pretty exciting for we had hemlock woolly adelgid show up in about March and April in the Hamilton area, and then we've had oak wilt just kind of start to blow up, which a lot of us did not expect that to happen anytime soon. So that's been a pretty huge surprise for a lot of people kind of in this field. So we kind of expected most of it to be coming from the Michigan area because that's where more like the worst outbreaks are, but that's why we're blown away that this is happening in the Niagara and already in this area, actually, Southern Ontario. So
that's crazy, man. Well, that's just jumping right into oak wilt. That's amazing. Before we get into any more oak wilt, I have to ask you, I ask everyone on the podcast, if you had to get taken out by a predatory animal in Ontario, which one would it be and why?
I'd probably say a cougar, just because it's a pretty rare sighting for one. I haven't really thought about it too much, but yeah, I'd probably say a cougar or one of the big cats, lynx or something cool like that, I guess.
Got it. So for like the cool after story for like your kids to tell at parties and stuff.
Yeah.
Got it. I love it.
In all likelihood, it will probably be a tree or me falling into a crevice or something, but
that's right. That's wild. So okay, yeah, you jumped right into it, my friend. Oak wilt. I mean, my favorite. I think a lot of people, if you ask them, what's your favorite tree in Ontario? I think a lot of people would say oak trees. I mean, they're just so freaking cool. And the acorns, for me personally, I love them because I'm a hunter and a fisherman, and so many critters in the forest I know rely on acorns. Right? They're such a wonderful source of high in carb, fats, and protein. My favorite oak personally is the bur oak. Do you have a favorite tree?
I would probably say tulip tree, just because that's kind of what I grew up seeing in like Carolinian zone and stuff like that. Tulip or American chestnut, they're really cool, like iconic looking trees. Very indicative of Carolinian forest, which is kind of like my jam.
Right on, man. Yeah, Carolinian forest is so cool. There's so many weird species down there that you just don't see anywhere else, like pawpaw trees, for example.
Oh yeah. Yeah, a lot of that stuff, like there's things I've maybe seen once or twice. And now, like I grew up in the Halton area. So now that I'm back kind of settled in this area, I'm seeing stuff that I've read about in books and that kind of thing that I'm running into in the wild. So it's a really cool experience to see stuff like that right in your backyard and kind of like under your nose all these years kind of thing before you had that eye for it. So it's a pretty cool, like eye-opening experience for me. So, yeah.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, that's wild. I mean, my first exposure to the Carolinian zone really was I did a planting event for tall grass prairie stuff, I think, with the Nature Conservancy in Norfolk County.
Okay.
Looking
Yeah.
at your
Yeah.
account, and I saw you had some pictures down in Norfolk County tagged down there,
Yeah.
and just like looking around and being like, "Whoa, I'm not in Kansas anymore, man. This is not
Oh
the
yeah.
Greater Toronto area.
Yeah.
This is
It's very
cool."
different. Yeah. It's
Now,
very like tropical.
it is tropical. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. When I spent so much time in Central Ontario, like Georgian Bay area, and
Yep.
when I was down in Norfolk County in that Carolinian zone, I literally felt like these trees are taller than normal.
Oh yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
hallucinating, or is it possible that actually like trees in that deep, high quality soil, longer growing season, et cetera, are going to be taller than trees growing on, 6 inches of soil on top of granite rock in Georgian
Yeah.
Bay?
Definitely that access to nutrients and things like that. Like you could have a tree, like for example, in Georgian Bay or Algonquin Park, that could be like a gnarled cedar. It could be like 12,000 years old, but it's no taller than you, right? Because they're in such like inhospitable conditions and stuff like that. Like I don't know if you ever been to the Eagle's Nest in Bancroft by chance?
No, 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 no. Is that a bar or is that a geographic
It's like
feature?
a lookout point that looks over like a Tim Hortons in Bancroft. It's nothing spectacular, but some of the trees that are there are probably fairly old. And same with if you've ever heard of Rattlesnake Point in Milton,
Yes.
there's in Tobermory as well. There's lots of trees there that are like the size of probably us standing up that are about 12,000 or sorry 1,200 years old and things like that. So it's because they've able to persist in such conditions like that. But when you go to places with like full nutrients and everything like that, trees can definitely get bigger, wider, meaner, all of the above.
Meter. Oh my
Yeah,
God. Wow,
I
man.
say I say the meaner because I was in Pelee Island recently, and the thorns on some of the locusts are just insane. Like I've never seen anything like it. You'd think it's like something out of the Serengeti or something like that. So yeah.
No way. That's wild, man. Holy cow. Well, that's really interesting. So if you took, say, like a white pine in Temagami versus a white pine, I'm not even sure if white pines grow down in Norfolk County, like on the North Shore of Lake Erie there. But
Yeah,
if
a little
those
bit.
a little bit, would
Yeah,
would
yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
the white pine be able to get just taller, max height down there on in Norfolk County?
If let's say the ideal conditions were met, probably. The only thing is you do get a lot of like the influence of the Great Lakes is such an anomaly in itself that like anything down there can change the like phenology of trees. But yeah, I would probably say if it were to get more nutrients and that kind of thing, it would probably do well. But it'd just be acclimatization in that. But for example's sake, I'd say yeah, it would probably get bigger. So
Got it.
yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. Now, yeah, you already got a little bit into the oak wilt, and I thought it was very interesting to hear you say that one of your two favorite trees is the American chestnut.
Mhm.
Because one of the things when I saw this news article in the Ontario Out of Doors magazine, which is a hunting and fishing magazine, right? They said
Yeah.
oak wilt
Oh yeah.
case discovered in Niagara region, and I was like, the first thing I thought of was the American chestnuts. Like, is the oak wilt this disease? Does it have the potential to do what happened to the American chestnuts, which is basically complete extermination? Like, how worried should we be about oak wilt?
Like you were saying, all the stuff that depends on it is probably the biggest. I'm trying to think of like the proper wording for this, but the life forms that it supports, like scaffold of biodiversity. Like for example, there's about 450 types of caterpillars that are supported by oak leaves and that kind of thing. So the sort of ecological importance and like fallout from it, we probably won't see for a long time. But when we do, it's going to be pretty deadly. The other thing too is with the American chestnut, we weren't really at the sort of technological sort of era that we are now, so it wasn't as evident. I mean, there still are American chestnuts. I've seen plenty of them in the wild here and there, but with oak wilt, it's hard to say at this point, but I've seen in Michigan is where it's really decimated a lot of areas, especially in areas with like residential and like where a lot of that interface between sort of infrastructure and stuff like that happens. So I think it's going to be really bad, but in isolated pockets. Um, sort of where American chestnut sort of wiped out a lot of forests. Like the damage it did to the forest has been irreplaceable, but with oak wilt, I think it's going to be a different ball game. I kind of put it on the level of Dutch elm disease, where A, it's a similar fungus that just clogs conductive tissue, and B, it's like a stately tree. You know, it's something a lot of people have in their front yard and that kind of thing, but it also is a wild tree as well. So it's kind of hard at this stage in the game to gauge how destructive it's going to be, but we all know it's probably not going to be good. So yeah.
Interesting. Now, I mean, the fact that it's been in this article in Ontario Out of Doors, it said that it's been around for 100 years already. So
Yep.
is that a good thing? The fact that it has been around 100 years, and even if it's, hitting hard in New York State or Michigan,
Mhm.
the oak trees are still going on there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's
Or,
not going to be like a complete, I don't think it's going to be a complete wipeout because, I mean, I look around like areas that I go to and I see a lot of four-stemmed oak that was logged about 100 years ago. So there is the possibility of it. It's just this early stage in it is a very, very awkward place. If you know what I mean? Like we're not sure how the spread and how the impact of some of these vectors are going to go. So it's hard to gauge, but the fact that we've only found a handful right now so far is good. It's the other stuff I'm seeing out there that I'm kind of scared shitless about.
Interesting. So you are, man, this conversation is going very different than I thought, because I thought you were going to be like, yeah, there's one case in Niagara. We don't have a lot to worry about, like this is not what I was
Yeah.
expecting.
So,
So
oh, sorry, continue.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the problem with it is that's why anybody who wants to talk to me about this, I jump on. Is there's a lot of lookalikes that can be confused that even I look at that I'm kind of like, this looks like it. So for me, if I see anything weird, I see anything out of the ordinary, I'm immediately GPSing and taking pictures of those trees. I've come across a few so far that have concerned me quite a bit, and we've had to call the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. But because you can't be sure because of the time frames that exist in it, that's going to be the biggest problem, I think, is everyone's going to kind of cry wolf to a certain degree, and then we're going to be missing stuff that we should be sort of picking up on. So, yeah, like I said, I don't think we'll see anything for a couple years at least before it gets like really picks up. But at this stage in the game, it's it's worrying no matter what. Yeah.
Interesting. And I also read in this article that it said that it affects the white oak family different than the red oak, right? Could you maybe tell folks like what's the general difference between the white oaks and red oaks, and how is that, like how does the disease manifest itself in those two arms of the oak family?
So white oaks have a different sort of how can I explain it? It's called something called tulsis, so it's able to resist it to a certain degree, and it's sort of like it will affect like one branch and it will slow down the process. So like you might have one branch die off and then a few more, whereas red oaks it will be pretty much you'll see some dull coloring, and then by about let's say August, it will be completely defoliated. And then you have these like pressure pads that form of the actual like fruiting body of the fungus that's kind of moved its way through the tree. And those will develop usually about a year after a tree has died from oak wilt. So the first year you have like your nice oak, and then you see some defoliation happen from like the top down. And then the second year you'll have these like cracks in the bark that will burst open, and you'll have these fungal like bodies that are about like 6 to 8 inches or so. They, to be honest, they look like a weird brain of sorts, and they emit a smell that smells like juicy fruit, or like apple cider vinegar. So I walked into a forest in Michigan once, and you could smell it just in the air this time of year. So it was a really weird experience. And it looks like the slime kind of you get as a kid in like those 25-cent gumball machines kind of thing. Like it's a very weird thing. It's disgusting to look at, but Yeah, it's because of the cycles that it works and because of the vectors that spread it. So let's say, for example, you have recently pruned a tree and there's something called netatulid beetles that are a method of transport, like a vector for it. They'll go from tree to tree feeding on sap and that kind of thing, or trees can have it however source they got it. If their roots are interconnected, they can also give it to each other like that. So that's where it's concerning with the spread of it, like what's going to happen now with that kind of thing. So, and the stages of it, like when I talk about it, I want to make sure people can see visually kind of what it might look like. Like if you'd like, I can actually send you some pictures if you'd like to use them for a post and that kind of thing. Like
That would be fantastic, man. I don't even know if is it possible to share your screen? I don't know if that's too much.
I just got back from vacation, so I'm
Okay.
doing that. But I can for sure send you some other info and stuff like that after this call and some photos that, as long as I'm credited, you can use however you want. Like
That would be that would be great, man. That's a horrific description of what this fungus
yeah,
smells and sounds like.
yeah,
That's so
sound and smell.
yeah, sound and smell. Oh my
Yeah,
God. So is this
yeah.
originally a Eurasian invasive
Mm,
fungus?
they think it might be some kind of genetic bottleneck that came from like South America or something like that, but the origin has not quite been like we've known about it since the 40s, but they've never been able to pin down the actual like where it came from. It is in the same family as Dutch elm disease, so because it has the same like conductive tissue shutdown kind of thing. It's basically like stepping on a hose and stuffing it with fungus kind of thing. Like it just shuts down all the water transport, everything like that. Similar issues with that, but they haven't quite been able to pin where it's come from, as far as I'm aware. So yeah,
Very interesting, because you're a general invasive species guy now. So, I mean, from everything that I've heard throughout my life about invasive species in Ontario, it's like that word Eurasia, it
yeah.
comes up a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah, with like the carp and everything like that too. So yeah, there's
It,
far more like European species that have been sort of naturalized to a certain degree. I use that term loosely, but yeah, with a lot of that stuff, with the carp and stuff like that, that's a big component. So yeah,
for sure. I just to me it makes sense that, it's kind of like a lot of the same climactic zones in northern Eurasia
oh yeah,
to
yep,
us.
yeah,
I
that's
lived
for
in
emerald
Asia.
ash borer, yeah, emerald ash borer, those kind of things. Yeah, like all the carp and stuff like that. Very similar temperate zone and that kind of thing. So it makes sense that stuff would be here, but yeah, it blends in quite well, unfortunately.
Absolutely, man. Oh my God. So you're talking, okay, so the functionality of this fungus, it's the capillaries in the tree. This is toward like the water transport. Is that
Mm-hmm.
like in the living layer? Is it called the Cambrium or something like that? Right
Yeah,
around.
along the whole like conductive zone, basically within the cambium, phloem, and xylem, it will basically kind of attack those zones. But it's hard to gauge. This is what I'm not 100% sure on. Like once it gets in, then what happens? So I've seen trees basically in the like sort of death throes, and then I've seen completely dead ones, but I've never seen that awkward period sort of in between those. So yeah. So
Wow.
as it starts, like let's say for example in a red oak, you'll see like one or two branches that have like an olivey color to the leaves, and that's why I'm saying a lot of this is visual sort of learning, but you'll see like one or two branches, and then by like late August, you'll see the branches or the leaves start to die back and slowly die back some more, and then by about mid-August, you have a completely defoliated tree. So that's probably the most common symptom that you'd see of this kind of thing, but yeah, it's very difficult to pinpoint with it. So yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So I think our common friend mentioned to me that she thought that there were some cases up near Barrie and that there were
Yep.
cases down near in the Niagara region. Is
Yep.
that all of the spread that you are aware of, or are
Yep.
there other areas?
As far as I'm aware of, there's a berry case, which I haven't looked into too much, but everything tells me that somebody transporting wood either through live edge pieces or firewood, or I don't know why you transport firewood from Niagara to Barrie, but it seems ridiculous. But yeah, and the other ones were from the Niagara Gorge area, as far as I know. There's been 3 cases, confirmed cases as of now. I can't see many more coming in outside of the Niagara area, other than this one in I think it's Springwater, just outside of Barrie. So yeah, that one's a weird one because everything in my mind tells me that's human spread, or like that vector is somebody bringing or transporting something they shouldn't. So that's why my PSA is don't move wood with every invasive that we have out there. So yeah. But the Niagara ones, as far as I know, it's Niagara on the lake and somewhere in the Niagara Gorge, so fairly close by. To be honest, before all this occurred, I just pretty much thought that we'd see it through the Michigan, Detroit area. So that's why we're kind of blown away that this is happening like this close to my home. So yeah, but
yeah, holy cow!
We have. There's a spot in Bell Island, Michigan, that's 500 meters away from the Canadian border. So basically, if a bug really wanted to fly that far, or a spore really wanted to fly that far to Windsor, it's right there. Like you can see across the Detroit River. So that's why we're very surprised. So yeah.
Wow. So the transmission, it's generally the spores can just be like, I guess with with mushrooms, they can just be floating in the air currents, and then it's also getting onto bugs and then being transported that way, or is it more of a bug heavy?
It's more of a bug heavy because the bugs will get into the like pressure pads that result from the fungus. Like it's basically like a fungus bursting from the inside out. And so the bugs get in there and they'll feed on things like sap or freshly cut trees or firewood or that kind of thing. So most of the time it would be that case that it would be the transmission, and then again people moving wood. So one of the countering effects that we have is trying to establish a no pruning zone from April to November. So like if Joe Blow Tree Service is like, oh, we got all these oaks to trim, like maybe just keep that in the wintertime because those bugs aren't active at that time and the spores aren't active. Pretty much like I don't want to say like any because I came from private industry, but like you should be pruning things when things aren't actively growing kind of thing. But obviously people, it's business. So,
yeah.
But trying to establish that and really pushing the not moving wood thing are going to be the biggest challenges, so to speak. So yeah.
Got it. So you think for prevention of spread, only pruning in the wintertime when trees are not actually actively growing, and then also do not carry firewood or live wood for any reason to new areas.
Yep. Yeah.
So. Holy cow. So right now, like if you were to design like a response team, that takes over the province and does a full COVID style lockdown to prevent this, like your best an oak lover's dream response. Okay. Would you like basically say, okay, everyone in the Niagara region, this is DEFCON 9, watch your oaks. Don't transfer firewood. If you see anything funny going on with your oaks, call you immediately and you will come and you will check them out. And then also I guess the Barrie region as well, right?
Yeah, it's still just such a weird, that's the biggest like wrench to be thrown in the whole situation, like how that occurs. So but yeah, basically if I were to give a PSA, I would say look at all your oak trees, especially right now, because this is the time when they're going to start defoliating. This is the time where they're going to start showing their first signs. I've actually got a couple of calls and pictures and emails and that kind of thing so far, but most of it is just we've had weird weather this summer, so it's a lot of lookalikes where I can say, okay, is that tree by a pool? Like, is it getting hot chlorine water vapors going up there? A lot of things look very similar, so it's very difficult, but the biggest thing I can say is if you see something, say something. Yeah, I'm not the face of Oak Wilt, but yeah, I've been getting a lot more questions than I usually do about it. So yeah, definitely like reach out to someone who knows. So yeah.
Small break from the podcast, everybody. Please support us on Patreon, patreon.com/wildontario. For just a few bucks a month, you can support the general production of all of our content. And for a few more bucks a month, you can get exclusive content for patrons only, like my weekly Wild Ontario in Review show. That is a live Q&A show. You can interact with me live. Check us out, patreon.com/wildontario.
Would you suggest they call the invasive species hotline, or should they call you? I'll give everyone your contact info, like your social media channels.
I have a lot on my plate, so I wouldn't say to call me, but the Canadian Food Inspection Agency would probably be the best organization to reach out to. With some of the some of the sort of calls that I've gotten or that kind of thing, or some of the trees that I've seen, we've actually submitted one, and based on sort of the conditions I described and that kind of thing, it was deemed watchable but not an immediate threat. So
okay,
yeah, I'll see a lot of trees that might have a different type of fungus, like armillaria, for example, is a type of fungus that affects oaks and can do sort of the same sort of like immediate kind of kill, like first season kill kind of thing, and it affects the roots, and you might not be able to see any of like the fruiting bodies of fungus until much further on. So there's been a lot of trees that we've marked in our GPS as saying, okay, let's come back here at such and such a date or by this date and determine what's going on. So yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're saying like August is the key time where if these trees are infected, they will start to show signs.
Yeah, if you're seeing a tree that looks like it should in November, completely defoliated, and you're seeing like leaves that are like bronzed or like scorched looking, and there's a certain pattern to it as well. So if you're seeing a lot of like defoliation happen, that would probably be something to look at. So yeah, there can be a lot of, like I said, there can be a lot of lookalikes, but this would be the time you'd start to really see it in the next like 2 or 3 weeks. So. Yeah.
Okay. That's and those pictures that you can send over to me, I will put them into the the video version of the podcast on YouTube so people can see it. And then maybe that'll help them kind of identify the layman out there. So if you think you have your tree has this the oak wilt, and maybe somebody confirms one of those organizations we mentioned, or an arborist such as yourself, it confirms that they do have oak wilt in a oak on their property. What should you do? Like, should you cut that tree down and like incinerate it as fast as possible? Or what do you do?
That's where we're going to have a bit of a problem, because we've known, before I say this, I have to disclaimer it. We've known that this was going to happen for a while. And with a lot of invasive species, you want to set up like quarantine zones to have that material. Like, you could chip the material. I don't think most of it would survive the chipping process, but like I said, I'm not so familiar with sort of the management after the fact. In Michigan, in some cases, they've taken logs and they've just tarped them up. So if there is any transmission of spores, it's contained. And then in other cases, because Michigan kind of has like a sandier sort of soil to it, it's sort of like Georgian Bay or like the Niagara Peninsula, Niagara Peninsula towards like Tobermory, Sable Beach, Lake Huron. It has that same sort of sandy buffer, so people have gotten excavators and just buried the logs and that kind of thing. So, and in some cases where people do own property like that, they will incinerate it, but that's where Southern Ontario is going to have a huge problem, because we have these massive, in some cases, like 400-year-old oaks. Like, where is that biomass going to go, like in the forest?
Yeah,
so
wild, man.
Yeah.
What about the treatment options? Because I think someone mentioned to me, it might have been your friend, that there is some kind, like, what are the fungicide options on this?
There's something in the States they use, and to be honest, like, I want to say it's called Rainbow, and it's a metacloprate, which isn't allowed in Canada. However, we had an issue with that with emerald ash borer, where azoractins, I think, were used. I'm not positive on this, but they were used as like an emergency use only, and that's become what they use for injecting ash trees to kill the emerald ash borer. So my hope is that, in a 5 years or however long it takes for that sort of process to drag out, that they allow for emergency use of this. I have seen examples in the States where it just keeps the trees kind of alive. However, it doesn't kill the fungus. So in some cases with, like, let's say park trees or that kind of thing, it might be similar to what treatment options is emerald ash borer, but it just remains to be, it kind of remains in hands that aren't sort of ours for the time being. Yeah. Yeah. So
what about the I know sometimes in organic farming they use like some copper based fungicides, quote unquote, like non-synthetic fungicides. Do those kind of things, would they have any effect on this fungus?
I don't think they would, because it's a different type. Because it would be the same sort of, it's the same family as Dutch elm disease, like the type of fungus. And I think they've used similar chemicals to prevent Dutch elm disease, but it's the same. I think it's the same yearly basis. I'm not 100% clear on this because I've only done it a few times, but there is that option, but it's probably highly costly and requires a lot more sort of management, maintenance, and that kind of thing. So I have a feeling it will be similar to what, like, we've already experienced with emerald ash borers and giving injections, where it is an option, but it's how much do you want to pay for that option kind of thing. So yeah, so that aspect is sort of still to be ironed out with sort of getting those pushes for emergency use for pesticides / fungicide and that kind of thing. So it's a bit different because also you're doing systemic injections, which you're drilling a hole and getting like a spring-loaded sort of punch into it, like a vaccination in a sense. So yeah.
Interesting. So maybe the best thing really for this, we'll keep abreast. I guess, I'll keep in contact with you and see what the deal is with these fungicides, if there's any development on that over the next few months. And so it sounds like really prevention, like trying to slow down the spread of
Absolutely.
This, probably number one in your books.
Pretty much, that's really all you can do. Prevention and immediate, well, as immediate as you can, like calling somebody, asking for help and that kind of thing is probably the best thing. Not moving the wood, and pretty much if you see something, say something. It's the best thing I can. For someone like me, I'm super interested in this. Obviously, this is not something I just fell into. So for me, it's more of, if someone were to call me about it, sure, I might be a little annoyed, but I'd rather you call me than don't. So you know what I mean? Giving the proper sort of information and education with things, I'm hoping will be a pretty good solution for people to say, okay, I saw something really weird and it's not this, it's not that. And that's pretty much the best options we have currently, and just slowing that spread. Like as quickly as we can slow that spread and contain those sort of areas, then the better off we all are. So without going on too much of a tangent, Southern Ontario is, well, at least where I live, some of the areas along the escarpment are about 70% oak. So that would be a detrimental loss to a lot of these areas, especially like, what are they going to call Oakville? Like, there's a lot of things that, a lot is at stake, especially in this area, because it's all secondary or third, like tertiary growth after, logging, and now this happens. So yeah.
Wow, that's wild, man. Yeah, I just think about, I was doing some planting on one nature conservancy property out in the Rice Lake Plains, and they're trying to establish all the kind of tall grass prairie stuff. And like literally the keystone tree species in these kind of tall are literally they're black oaks, like black oak savannas, which are, from what I remember, I think that's in the red oak family. And super cool trees. Other than that area, those tall grass prairie pockets, I have never seen that tree before in my life. It's super cool. But like for those tall grass prairies in Southern Ontario, the few of them that are left, I mean, that would be absolutely, it'd be fucking terrible for everywhere. It would be terrible for everywhere. Like you said on the escarpment, 70% of the biomass is freaking oak. But could this be kind of if it's been here for 100 years and it's kind of at more of a simmer, like a slow roll, a slow boil kind of situation, could it maybe reduce like the overall biomass of oak trees in the province by maybe, I'm just like, scenario plan in my head. Maybe
Yeah.
it knocks back oaks overall by about 5%, but the oaks are still chugging along, right? Do you see that as a potential outcome?
I hope so.
Yeah.
So, I hope so, but what I've seen in Michigan is not. I've seen areas where you have some affected and some not, kind of thing. So what I'm hoping is, it's just isolated pockets and that's it. But the problem kind of is when it gets onto private property, right? So where it doesn't get the same sort of attention or that kind of thing. That's where a lot of the problems with invasive species sort of happen, where someone just doesn't give a shit about trees or that kind of thing. Like, oh well, it's dead, whatever. Just being aware and having that, like currently with the state that we have, where we have about 3 to maybe 7 trees max. I want to be optimistic and say that's pretty good. So based on what I've seen elsewhere, so I'm hoping that if those have been dealt with and that kind of thing, that those are just our isolated pockets and that's it. But as the summer progresses and next summer, I'm sure we'll see a few more cases. But the fact that we've just had those 3 so far is fairly good in a sense. Yeah. So.
Absolutely. Oh, very, very interesting. Now, how would this like we've got so much friggin' crown land in this province, right?
Oh yeah.
If this got into the crown land, would it spread any differently in like wild areas versus more domesticated areas? Like more suburban and urban areas. Would the spread be worse, or would it be like would the trees be more resilient for some reason?
That's a really good question. Actually, I never thought of that. With anything that's like I'll use the example of Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer. So Dutch elm disease wiped out all the elm trees that were all in like residential areas and that kind of thing, and a lot of those are big stately trees similar to oak. And then ash was put in because it was cheap, it grew fast, and it just took over old pastures. It took over places that elm were. We didn't have as many invasive species like buckthorn and other junk like that to kind of fill those roles. So ash absolutely exploded to fill those holes. So a lot of those were planted again as street trees and that kind of thing. So now that emerald ash borer has happened, I want to say that with oak, it was sort of planted in a similar fashion, but sort of in those isolated pockets, like as street trees and park trees and that kind of thing, or just like they were saved as remnants in parks and stuff like that from other areas. So I feel like in residential, sort of more sort of civilized areas, it will be far worse. Where in wilder areas where it's not as sort of oak dominant or monoculture, you won't see it spread as much. It's the same way where if you go to like Peterborough or those kind of places, you still see a ton of ash because there's a lot more species diversity and there's a lot more open space. So that might be the benefit of crown land, where you do have that species diversity and that kind of thing, where the next oak might be like a kilometer away or that kind of thing. So that aspect is hard to gauge. And the other thing is maybe I'm hoping, I don't actually know this, but I'm hoping maybe our temperature maybe keep some of it at bay. But our temperature is very similar to like northern United States, Michigan, where I've seen in the flesh. Kind of
Interesting. Yeah. Like, is oak wilt in the upper peninsula of Michigan? I guess they'd still maybe have red oaks up there, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
But I wonder
There's
if it's in the
topography.
UP. I wonder if it's in the UP or if it's just in southern.
I think I'm pretty sure it's in both. To be honest, I only saw it sort of near Lansing, Detroit, and some of those areas. So, but yeah, it's similar topography. But I wouldn't be surprised in the Upper Peninsula if it's a lot more scattered. But then again, you do have like cottagers. It's similar to Ontario in aspect where people are moving wood and that kind of thing all the time. So yeah, it's hard to gauge. I've thought about this a lot in the past couple months since the first sort of things have shown up, and like trying to predict the trajectory of it has been a bit difficult. So yeah, but like I said, very happy it's just these pockets right now.
Yeah, thank God, man. We should just napalm those entire areas where it's being found. You know, if you had 100% power as the premier of Ontario, just napalm the entire, like, square kilometer to take it out, and then we
Yeah.
wouldn't have to worry, right? We might kill some people, but it'd be worth it.
Yeah. Well, then they'd put condos up. So
That's true.
taking their last post.
That's very true. Well, that's very
Yeah.
true. Well, speaking of fire, I mean, from everything I've heard you say, I mean, this might be getting a little bit ahead of the problem, but I mean, if at some point there are, starting to be numbers of these trees dying, I would say fucking burn them, man. Like if you're going to chop it down on your like you wouldn't want to leave, like I think, some people recommend. I've heard, standing dead trees can actually be beneficial for a lot of wild critters, right? Like porcupines on them and birds, burrow into them and insects that live in them, etc. But I'd say this is an example. If you have an infected tree, cut it down and burn it, like in your fireplace. I mean, that oak would be great, firewood, right?
And that's the unfortunate problem of it is oak is such a great firewood and that kind of thing, and such great hard wood that's where the don't take wood thing is going to be a real problem, I think. So, yeah.
For sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, this is amazing information, Jeff. Is there anything else you think we've missed that we should think about, or you want people to know about oak wilt?
Just more so, just the not moving wood, and if you don't need to prune oak trees and that kind of thing in the growing season, which you shouldn't anyway, but just keeping that window of November to April, like no prune zone, unless it's like something hazardous, like something is actually broken out. Trying to reiterate that message is probably the best thing. And again, with if you see something, say something, or just reach out to somebody who might know and that kind of thing. So yeah, like I don't want to get my sort of inbox flooded, but again, if someone does see something in my area that's like, okay, this is pretty serious, like it's worth checking out. So yeah, and just reaching out to the CFIA, I can pass all this information on to you as well if there is anything, and just being educated on it. There's plenty of really great, accurate information out there that is very helpful. Even for me, there's stuff that aspects of it that I'm becoming familiar with. I'm technically an oak wilt specialist, but I've only seen it a handful of times. So there's still aspects of it that might be different from what I've seen in the States. So yeah.
Fascinating, man. Okay, excellent. And in terms of people, if you do want people reaching out to you, or just maybe even following you on the interwebs, is there anywhere you want to direct people in terms of Instagram or YouTube or anything like that?
Yeah, maybe direct them to my Instagram. Like that's probably something I can manage that. So yeah, that's just my name, Jeff Dickie. So yeah.
Jeff Dickie. Okay, great. Yeah, and if you hear any more cases, and you want me to get the word out there to people,
for sure. Yeah.
Just let me know. And I think the final question for you, Jeff, is you're an invasive species guy. If you could exterminate, annihilate, liquidate one invasive species out of Ontario, what would it be? Like, what do you think is the single most deleterious invasive you think in the province?
Probably dog strangling vine or buckthorn. I can't decide which one I hate more. Buckthorn probably more so because it's just so pervasive and it is everywhere, like absolutely everywhere. That's probably my worst because I got a pretty good vendetta on that. So
really? So do they just strangle out the bottom of the canopy? Like, do they grow underneath the canopy, or are they like in kind of edge habitat, open meadow stuff? Like
pretty much. Buckthorn is like it's like a heavy cedar, so like the female trees are just loaded with berries. Birds eat them, take a dump, spread it somewhere else. That's going to be the next problem too. If let's say oak wilt becomes a problem, birds will eat buckthorn berries, go up into your dead oak and roost, do whatever they do, and defecate in large numbers, and then you have a whole new buckthorn patch. And this is kind of what I call the invasional meltdown, where I see dead ash and things like that, where this is happening. So you have these pockets in the forest that are just should be filled with, sugar maples or beech or that kind of thing, cherries, and it's all just buckthorn. So it's like totally messing up the whole sort of ecosystem through one little entry point kind of thing. So I've dealt with buckthorn pretty much my entire career, so spraying it and killing it is very satisfying.
I can imagine. Are you talking like sea buckthorn, that common ingredient in cosmetics?
That's bad too, but not as pervasive. Buckthorn is like a purple berried, like small shrub. It's the same size as sea buckthorn. I'm pretty sure it's even the same family. Sea buckthorn's a little bit pretty because it has those little jack-o'-lantern berries, and people make jam out of it. That's actually quite delicious, but it's a side project. But yeah, you see it pretty much in abandoned fields, abandoned pastures, and that kind of thing. On every like forest edge, probably in southern Ontario, it's there. So yeah, it's thorny, it's nasty, it's hard to get rid of. Its roots choke out things like trilliums and other native ephemerals and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Nasty stuff, man. Well, correct me if I'm wrong here. If I was Premier of Ontario, the first thing I would do in office is ban all non-native plants from being sold in the province. Would you agree with that, Mr. Jeff Dickie?
There's definitely a few that are still sort of sold at nurseries and that kind of thing that I'm kind of surprised at, like barberry and things like that. I think it'd be good just to take that step, and they don't really sell buckthorn and that kind of thing, but just having people to be sort of responsible for what they bring in or plant and that kind of thing, like with an example like Norway maples are everybody's favorite tree, but those are destroying ravines in Toronto and that kind of thing. So yeah, just kind of being responsible and just kind of maybe taking a hard stance would be nice.
Yeah, it pisses me off so much because there's a number of retailers in Ontario that sell only native plants or bushes or trees, and you look on there and the diversity of like for your garden, like an ornamental garden, right? Whatever texture, size, color of shrub or bush or tree you could possibly want, there's a native species for it. Like you don't, and I get it. We have relationships with certain species again that generally come from Europe or Asia, right? And Japanese maples or Norway maples. It's like,
oh yeah.
You don't need to do it, guys. You really don't need to do it. There's other shit you can use.
Yeah, the human tendency is to want what other people don't have, right? Like, and that's the biggest problem with it, right? Like, someone will be like, "Oh, this is really cool. Like, my friend gave this to me from India or something. Let's see if this seed pops," or that kind of thing. Like, it's a natural, like, curious thing that put it in your garden, cool. Let it go in the ravine, maybe not so cool. So.
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you so much, Jeff Dickie, for being on the Wild Ontario podcast. And, we've got this little community now on TikTok that's 57,000 and Instagram that's 7,000. People are just so thirsty for this Ontario kind of nature content. And I can already see from this conversation, maybe I'm going to hit you up in a month or two if you're willing to talk about. I think I could see 2 more podcasts with you, my friend. One entirely on invasive plant species, and then another one entirely on what's the state of the health of Ontario forests? Because you mentioned the American chestnut, you mentioned elm, you mentioned, I believe, the hemlock woolly agalids or whatever those things are. You mentioned a few interesting trees in there, and I think you've probably got some great info for everyone out there on those. So I may be hitting you up in the future, my friend.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. That'd be great because I'm probably getting more information as the days go on about this kind of stuff. So for sure to touch base with me in like a month, it might be a different story. I might be a little more pessimistic or a little more optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. Well, thank you so much, Jeff Dickie. May the gods bless you for protecting Ontario trees and plants, my friend.
Thank you so much to Mr. Jeff Dickie for this amazing information. I'm going to post those pictures of what oak wilt looks like on oak trees on our Instagram and TikTok channels. So check that out there. Please share this podcast. Please leave a 5-star review if you feel so inclined, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Greatly appreciated. May the gods bless you, great people of Wild Ontario.